Welcome to Harmonic Alignment. On this first episode back, as I like to call not our rebranding, but our remembering, you are in for a special treat. Nancy MacMillan. Nancy wrote this beautiful and powerful book on death and dying. The Call to the Far Shore, Caring for Our Loved Ones Through Death, Dying, and Beyond. This is a book that has moved me in ways that I didn't realize were possible. It's helped me to conquer some fear around death and to really think about my connection with my ancestors. I feel so honored to have met Nancy, and it's through this incredible, beautiful synchronicity of the world that I did meet Nancy. I happened to be at Dr. Kevin Preston's event at the New Human in Canada, and she met my friend Mike Broadwell, who I had told about Kevin's event. He was there, and he met Nancy and said, I really think you need to talk to Priscilla. She has this podcast. And then when I met Nancy, she was friends and had been mentored by Dr. Robert Sardello, who happens to also be the mentor of my friend and mentor, Monsignor Don Fisher. So we have this beautiful connection, soul connection. She also is of Celtic ancestry, which we talk about on the podcast. She's a registered psychotherapist, a writer on all types of themes of death and dying. And this book is so powerful. You can find Nancy's work on nancymacmillan.com. That's Nancy, MacMillan. And she also has a Substack where she shares her articles, and she's also on Instagram. So I hope you find a beautiful place to sit and listen to Nancy's wisdom. I found out in nature, really, as I was re-listening to this, it just made my heart sing. And I hope that you will find a way to bring this book into your life and share it with loved ones. The Call to the Far Shore by Nancy MacMillan. It is such a deep honor and pleasure to be here today with an author and a wisdom keeper. Her book has been one of those moments where I think you come across a book and you can remember the way you were before and the way you were after. And that's how I feel about Nancy's book. And I'm so excited to share Nancy MacMillan and her wisdom here on Harmonic Alignment. And her beautiful book is called The Call to the Far Shore, Carrying Our Loved Ones Through Dying, Death, and Beyond. Nancy, what an honor and a treat to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. It's a real honor for me to be with you and your presence and all that you bring to your work and your interesting life and the people that are drawn to you and that might be listening right now.
Well, thank you. I just have to share, I was scared of your book. When you first talk about death, I thought, I don't know if I have the ability to read this because I avoid a lot of things that I think are going to cause pain. And I think for me, death was one of those topics. I've lost some grandparents, but never anyone in the immediacy of my life. And you didn't just share the journey of your own parents, but you shared your own journey around your health and death issues. And then you shared the collective's journey. I think there was so much wisdom that I just wasn't expecting in that story that told this beautiful, not just one side of it, a very complex interweaving of life and death and why we're here. It was magic.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You have spent your life on this journey. Is it fair to say death found you, or you connected in early on in that realm?
A really wonderful way to put it, how death found me, right? Not something we go and seek usually. So definitely it's something that comes to us and forces our hand in a sense, and how we take that hand back will shape the next steps. And from an early age, I had different experiences with death, my own different illnesses that kind of from an early on made me have to look at life in a much bigger way, that there's lots to go through with life. I guess I could jump ahead to, cancer diagnosis. When I was a young mother and having two young children, with that experience forced me to go through so much transformation and to grab for the wisdom and for people who could help me understand and to walk with fear for so long and walk with uncertainty, which I can't say I ever got good at. I guess it ripened my soul to be able to take on more hard things. And then a pivotal experience being with my father when he died. That was before the cancer diagnosis. So that was, I was in my early 30s, and that was my first death, and being up close to him, and I was committed to kind of sticking with him through his last night. It brought me to a threshold of experiencing death, like the being of death. It was a profound experience of being up too close to him as he was taking his last breaths. These words came to me: "You're too close, back off." And it was like, whoa, what is that? The words were just, "This is the angel of death," or the guardian of death. And so I went back to my cot where I'd been trying to sleep. And somehow I fell asleep again, very nervously. And then, I don't know how much longer, my cot collapsed, waking me up. And that's when I heard the last breath. And I was able to be fully present in that very last moment. But that taught me so much. One is that death is a being that we can be in relationship with, and that our loved one needs space, that we can't be grabbing them back from that journey that they need to be taking on their own at the very end, with all the support and love around them, but still on their own. And that we can keep a connection with our loved ones afterwards, because that opened up an ongoing relationship with my father that I tended through having these little coffee times with him every week, I would say, because we had coffee at the hospital for 6 months while he was in the hospital. And I would sit with him and I would talk to him as if we were still together and in the flesh. And I'd read to him or have verses. And I can't say that he appeared to me out of the blue, but I felt I was developing a relationship with him in his new place. And that really came to the head when I had this vivid dream. And the dream was that my hands were now longer. My reach was extended because he was going to be there helping me. So that ushered in that reality, not just a thought, but the real reality that we can keep a connection with our loved ones after death. And that became an important touchstone for me, and eventually led me into working in a hospital as a spiritual care practitioner. Multi-faith chaplain is another word often used, and a psychotherapist with the terminally ill, the very ill. And so I had the opportunity to be around death on a daily basis and could just experience the many ways that death calls us and the many ways we get to respond. And finding that, that in a very unique way and a very distinct and maybe oddly way, death can also be beautiful. Not just tragic, not just pain and suffering. Yes, there's going to be a ballpark of that, but that's not all there is. And that was a huge, experience that I was then able to take into the very long and arduous time of my mother's dying and death. And many people, will have aging parents whose minds might be changing. And that was my story with my mother, walking with her as her mind became less able. It was a long and hard journey, as many of us face or will face, but lots of surprises along the way that, has made it one of the richest experiences now, in hindsight, looking back. But also, as we approached the end of her days, a few experiences were so profound, and I was able to bring my experience of being in the hospital with so many people to bear with my mom as she was lying and going through the changes in her breathing, the changes in her skin color, the modeling, and all the many natural changes that our bodies know how to do when they die, when we die. I was watching that with my mom. And the nursing staff would come in and they wanted to give her pain medication because they presume she must be suffering because she's dying. I did not see my mom suffering. And so I was able to say, can we just keep holding off? Because as much as I don't want my mom to suffer, I don't see that. I see my mother dying. And that for them was a revelation as well, because they do not see natural unfolding of dying because medication comes in at such a early stage or a predictable stage, or it's just clinically done, that they have lost the experience of what a natural death can look like. So allowing my mom that space to take her last breath unmedicated, that's an unusual thing these days, and that's so sad that that's been taken from us because we miss the innate intelligence and beauty of our body, knowing what to do, to letting go the different layers of our body, letting go in a natural way leads us to that edge of the threshold where we can have even awareness at that, even if we're unconscious, but there is an opening somewhere in us, that there is an awareness that we are going home. And it can be a joyful homecoming, not necessarily a dimmed one.
Nancy, I am so grateful for that because the way you describe it, I think we just do death wrong. We get some understandings of death. We all know it is part of our all souls journey. And for thousands of years we've been dying, but only in the recent have we been putting people on these drugs that take away from that experience or take the consciousness to where they're not really able and you're unconscious to really process that experience. We've met through Dr. Zach Bush and again have a Dr. Robert Sardello connection. But I've heard Dr. Bush talk about when that soul is medicated, it is not the same death. They're not able to come to this clear understanding or maybe even connect with the beauty. I've been told there's even all these wonderful hormones that come in to make it a more peaceful experience.
Yes, that's been my understanding too, that we have natural hormones that is part of that natural letting go of the different stages. Most cultures and traditions have had a map of what happens as we die and what's on the other side. We've lost a lot of that knowledge, so we have to find our maps again. People like Zach Bush and Robert Sardello and many people now are finding a way to talk about death and bringing back what indigenous cultures have known all along, that there's a threshold that we cross and there's another journey, a remarkable journey that is part of the whole cycle of living and dying and all that's in between. Maybe we're at a time now that we can come to bring death as a closer companion that is just part of the cycle of life. And it's another stage of life. It's not meaning life is over. No, it's a new life. We can't see it. Some people have ability to see and have come back near-death experiences. So we're getting glimpses, a lot of glimpses now that hopefully can inform us and give us a little more trust so that when we're up close to the death of a loved one or a friend, we can be present in a more trusting way and bring all of us to it, which is going to mean our grief and our bereavement and all the suffering that comes with the partings that come at the end. But it can also mean we can take hold of it and bring more of ourselves to that moment and have the thing that death does, which is breaks us open at the edge, and we're at the edge. And so all the things that have been living in us that may have not been fully expressed, we get a chance to let some expression come, and our loved ones get to say all the things that have been held in. And so if we allow ourselves to really die, we get to be broken open. And in that vulnerability, miracles happen. Honestly, there are miracles that happen at that very edge of life where you think life is done. They just have to take those few next steps and they're gone and I'll be able to leave the room. But if you really hang in there together, I've seen so many remarkable things happen in the last moments of death even. They're precious. Let's not end our participation in it, too soon.
I love that. Recently, I've been studying the gene keys and Richard Rudd, and the gene key, it's 28. It's right in the center of my chart, and the city is immortality, but the shadow and this fear of death. And Richard actually talks about maybe all fear is death related. Every fear on the planet could go back to somehow connected to death. Why do you think the human experience is so afraid? Why do you think souls are so afraid of death?
Mhm. Well, we can speak at a few different levels there, but the fear that comes down to the fear of death seems so much about losing control. And so when I am with people in my clinical practice and psychotherapy, it's often about control and whether that's our egos that just have to hang on to what we know because the unknown is scary. So we can trace that down all the many levels to that bottom level of our bodies dying. So that's how, again, tracing back to ancient wisdom in so many cultures, the wisdom is to learn how to die before you die so you can truly live. That means every time we meet those moments where we are fearful of that control, it's like, okay, noticing it and feeling the resistance, feeling what it is to want to control, and just allow all that to really intensify so you get to know what that's like. And the more we allow that feeling of need to control and sit with it and feel it bodily, it starts to change. And all of a sudden, it's not gripping so hard. We're softening. We're softening at that edge. And that is a little bit of dying. Yeah.
There was this beautiful moment. You described a mother coming to you who had just lost her husband, and she was trying to decide whether or not she should bring her 4-year-old to see him. Can you walk us through that? Because I think what you said to the mom about how she views it was the most important thing.
Well, it was a tragic situation of a young father dying suddenly, and he was a doctor in a hospital. So everybody knew him. The wife was there and being very stoic and strong because she had her child to be thinking of. And the only thing that she wondered, that she wanted to know from me, is whether she should bring her in. And I remember saying, what's really is how you are holding this is how your daughter will hold it. And if you're comfortable being in the presence of death, as hard as it is, but if you can stand there and be with it and behold it, then your daughter will learn the most deepest gift because being in the presence of death will teach her that we can stand with it and that in time to come, she will learn that it is not the end. And over different stages of learning that and letting go, and it's a journey. It's not just one off. It'll be hard, but that will be such an important gift for her to not be hidden from it. Because especially for a child, their imagination will fill in what's not offered to them in a truthful way. And the imagination is often more harsh, and the feeling that it will be something because of something she did, that's a typical response, that they'll have to figure it out. And the only way they'll figure it out is by that magical thinking that I did something wrong. That's such a typical experience for young people. So the more they are brought into the experience and able to be natural with it, like to be able to sit on the bed and touch the father and to know that it looks like he's sleeping, but he is more than sleeping.
Thank you for that. Because I think when we avoid death or we pretend or we lock it away, it makes it the struggle and the journey even more painful. And just sit with it and to find the peace and the grace in that moment and
Yeah.
is so important. One of the other things that was so powerful is that you talk about getting the story of a loved one as they're aging and
Mm.
sitting down and asking these wonderful questions of what were the things in their life that they most enjoyed. And you had done that at a young age. I think you sat down with your own grandmother uh,
Right.
and recorded her speaking Gaelic even.
Yes, that was way back when I was writing the book, and all these memories came back to me as I was fleshing it out. And I was speaking of how I did this in the hospital, and I did it with my mom. And then all of a sudden, I realized I had done it way back with my grandmother as she was in her last days. So I realized a tradition had been developing, but it became fleshed out, the reasons for it and the beauty that it gives for both people and then the whole family, this legacy making of a story that will be told for generations. Because we think of what we've lost by not being as connected with our ancestry and our cultural traditions. So much of that is about stories. And I know I have very few stories of my extended family, and they didn't have them either. There's just this cutoff that has happened. So this is a little piece of bringing it back.
What is the advice you give when you meet with somebody or how to tell the story or what questions you should ask to go to a little deeper level of
Right.
knowing?
There's a book now out called Dignity Therapy. So it's on, a researcher who's done it. So you could actually research it, but on a very light scale, it's like, tell me about your life, and then what was your first job, or how did you meet grandfather, or what was your favorite pet, or your favorite food? You're just getting the conversation going, and you learn about traditions that they may have not even remembered until their memory is triggered by somebody who's interested, like actually interested in their past. I'm thinking of old people for whom there's kind of a old fashioned or that is just not relevant anymore and who's interested. So especially if there's young people around who can actually get interested in like, wow, I mean, you didn't have a computer, of course we're into that
Right.
state. What
There's
did
still
you
some people around who are not, who remember before cars at this point, but we're getting,
Yeah,
yeah, the technology
yeah,
is changing so
yeah.
fast.
And the stories can be seemingly light and not relevant, as I even wrote in the book. It's some things that my grandmother had said. But it gave me a feel, gave me an essence of who she is. And it's that essence that can carry on. And reading it back, it's another window into how we can create a connection with our loved ones after they're dead. We can have pictures of them up, we can have their stories that we can bring out on occasions. And it's that image of giving them a seat at our table,
Mm.
which I love. What does that look like metaphorically and really literally when families gather? Can you raise a toast to the grandma who's not there or the brother, and remember them, name them, use their
Right.
name, and their name brings them into the room.
I am so glad you said that. By naming them or just including them in the conversation and saying their name, you bring their essence, their energy with you. I was actually raised that the dead were conscious of nothing. And so we and my family, through the Jehovah's Witness lineage, we didn't talk about it. And it
Mm.
wasn't until I started meeting other traditions and I became friends with a Monsignor, Don Fisher, who studied with Dr. Robert Sardello, that he said, oh, absolutely, they're with you. They're on the other side. They're supporting you. I didn't know some of my grandparents really that had crossed over, and then calling them in Can you explain more about what we can do to support that connection after our loved one, or even the ancestors that, may go back several generations? Almost all ancestors have led some incredible trauma and trials and tribulations in your past. How do
For
we
sure.
connect with those souls?
Right. Well, I would say there's the external way, the gesture of having the pictures out and bringing the stories and giving them the seat around our gatherings, and just the way to make them present in our daily life and reality. And then there's the level of becoming quiet within ourselves. And if we have a practice of becoming centered or meditating, contemplating, just saying their name. And if we're still enough and paying attention, just noticing what that stirs. And I learned some of this with Robert Sardallo. He's very wonderful at expressing how it is we can physically, in our bodily sense, a presence or become even open to that possibility. And just by playing with it, we're inviting something in to our field. A little dance can start happening of, is that something? Oh, no, that's my imagination. Is that something? And maybe it is our imagination. And isn't that wonderful? Because our imagination has truth in it and a reality behind it. And we have to lean into our imagination to open up that world that we can't see so well. And then that becomes more and more vivid and real. And then the essence, this is something that I learned through Robert Sardello, was finding a particularity of a person, some characteristic that is sort of just characteristic of them that you can call to mind. So I remember having a picture of my father holding my daughter when she was just an infant, and he was kind of holding her out like this, because he was a bit nervous. And that was the characteristic picture I have of him that I can bring to mind, where he's kind of mischievous, kind of nervous, and it was just sort of captured something. And so when I bring that quality of my father up, it's like he's right here.
I love that.
So it's making room.
I want to share that my grandmother comes as a dove. And as I was exploring this understanding of ancestors in 2016, my brother was hit by a semi and he went 20 feet in the air. And we really didn't know how he was going to survive. And I remember getting to the hospital, and there was little angels and guardian angels and little messages. It felt like I was being held as I got there. And this accident happened on November 30th. And we were in the hospital and I was overnight with him. And it was December 4th and it was his birthday. And I said to my brother, I said, today's your birthday and Grandma Kay is going to come see you. And he looked at me and he said, well, what about Grandma Eldora? And I said, well, Grandma Kay is going to come see you. And at the time, like, he knew he had just gotten remarried. Like, he knew everything. I said, Grandma Eldora is dead. And he said, no, she's not. I just saw her. She's old, but she's not dead. You're lying. And he got very angry in that moment. And I said, well, maybe she was your guardian angel. And his accident on November 30th would have been her 99th birthday. And so it was this confirmation that absolutely she was there with him. And
Oh,
when he crossed or came back, that was her presence. It was such a God and beautiful moment to have my family still intact, that date of 11/30/2016 became just a day to celebrate. And also a day to celebrate that there was this deeper connection that I didn't quite understand, that the ancestors and those who crossed over and angels are all a part of it. Because I thought I was just here, but my world just got that much bigger. And
wow.
a year later, there was a great grandbaby born on her 100th birthday. And so I
Oh,
always feel like that was a pivotal moment. And so now when I pray, I call in my ancestors of love and light and I give thanks. And I just, whew, it's nice to have a bigger team, I think, around me.
oh, well, thanks for sharing that. That's really profound. to be that close to losing your brother of such powerful connection I can feel,
Yeah.
and what ushered in with that.
And so the dove thing is that she was this prolific gardener, and she had a room in her house called the bird room where she would rescue birds that only had one wing. And she had many doves that we as kids would go get grasshoppers for the
Right.
doves and the birds. And but you've mentioned in your book that a lot of people have a ladybug or a cardinal. What are some of the things people
Yeah.
see to have that, connection with their loved one?
Right. Right. It will come in different ways. And that was the interesting thing in being in the hospital. And part of a way to get into conversation about death would be to say, has it ever happened that you've had a sense of somebody after they've died, that their presence was trying to connect with you? And even the most devout atheists would have a story. And that just seems so remarkable to me that 9 out of 10 people will have had some experience that they can recount. If that's the case, then why don't we live that way? That just became a question I lived with. If so many people will have the experience of the rainbow coming at the right moment when you've thought of somebody, or the cardinal is tapping out the window, or the clock stops, what does it take for us to really embrace the full circle of life? We're being knocked all the time with these messages, and hopefully we can start opening to them before we have to get so knocked over that it's harder to respond. It helps so much if we start bringing the conversation of dying into our lives earlier than when we are at the outer edges of our life, because we have to build up our muscles to get stronger, to know how to do the heavy lifting when a difficult diagnosis comes, or when a loved one has had a serious incident. Then it is deep water. And if we get a little practice along the way, it'll prepare the way so much more easily for us. We can harvest the richness of what happens to us all along the way, and especially at the end. And that leads me to the step with my mom that really broke open the door to death for me, quite very wide, was the decision to bring her body home to my home after she died, and to care for her body for 3 days in my home. I know this is done, people probably have heard of home funerals now and death doulas or death guides, that there is a practice and a movement that we can bring death home again, because it wasn't so long ago that that's the way it was. And that gave us the experience of being up close to death. Part of what's made death so fearful, we don't have experience anymore of what death looks like. So now the tide is turning, and we can bring our loved ones home. Most people think you're not allowed to, or it's illegal, but you have full right to bring your body home, at least in my part of the world. Of course, I had to broach that with my mother, and I was a little nervous how she would respond. But I'd had a number of conversations with her about death and dying, because that, of course, that was my world. So she was used to me bringing it up. And so I did broach her, and I ended up recording the conversation because it was so beautiful, and I knew I would have to share it with other people, especially my sister, who might be concerned about me pushing something I wanted and not what my mom might want. So I remember putting my phone up and recording the conversation where I said, "Mom, I'd really like to bring your body after you die home and care for you at home. How would that be for you?" And she, was just so moved. And she leaned forward into the camera. She said, "You would do that for me?" I would be so honored, because she remembered her mother being laid out in the parlor at her home when she was young. So I had that to be able to give me confidence to bring her home. And with a team of friends who we'd been having conversations with around how to do this, and I had a good friend, Aileen, who was a death guide. So we brought my mother's body home, and it was the most profound time of being with my mom, whom I didn't have an easy relationship with. But the death process, dying time, brought us closer because she dying and letting go of all the layers that made her who she was on the outer level started breaking down. And I got to know her in a different way. And then when she was in my home with her body, it was like, oh my gosh, I don't want her to go. I've just gotten so close with you. And now I see that, Mom, you are a sage, which I never would have maybe thought. And tending her body in the way that is easy now. We have all the Techna ice that makes keeping a body cool and making a beautiful room with flowers and candles. And the presence that was created just made death beautiful. And that we had 3 days to say goodbye.
Well, Nancy, does the 3 days of honoring, doesn't that go back into Christian tradition? Didn't we have 3 days with Jesus? I mean,
That's right. That's exactly, where does the 3 days come from? Well, Jesus had 3 days. So I'll tell a couple anecdotes. My husband's father died, and I had known that it would be good to let a body rest for a few days, or that was a thought that I'd had through lots of reading of Rudolf Steiner and some of the understandings of what death is through anthroposophy. So I suggested that, let's put off cremation for 3 days. And so on the third day, my husband phoned up the crematorium and the caretaker that said, oh, it's good. Yep, yep, it's good to do now. He's ready now. He wasn't yesterday.
wow.
This is a person who works with bodies all the time, wasn't steeped in esoteric thinking.
Yeah.
He knew, he experienced that. So when my mom was lying and we were preparing her on the last day to go to the funeral home, I touched the top of her head and energy was just pouring out of her.
Mm.
And I thought, I'm imagining something. I brought my daughter in, who's a massage therapist and sensitive, and she put her hands there and she jumped back and thought she wanted to leave the room because it was like, this is too freaky. So viscerally, I know that dying is a process up until the time that we are called dead. And in the days afterwards, there is a process of excarnating
Mm.
that takes time. So slowing things down, allowing again that natural process of leave taking, the courtesy that we can give our loved ones. It's just a beautiful thought, isn't it?
Oh, it's such a beautiful thought. It reminds me, I heard once that every time a child is born, the angels and the ancestors look down and say, maybe this one will be the one who heals the family lineage.
Oh,
And I just have this idea that your soul came in and the work you did with your mother wasn't just for your mother or for you, it was for all those before and after. And what a beautiful gift you've given your family lineage of healing. There's a quote in your book, is it Sally
mm.
Beckhoff? And she said that if epigenetics changes our DNA with trauma, can DNA be altered by great acts of kindness? Ah, what about the
Right.
ancestors who do such wonderful, good, kind, loving acts? Can they reprogram that for the next generation?
Yeah. Yeah. The scope of our imagination and the reality that we live in. It's profound. I remember as I was tuning into this ancestral world, which kind of just awoke through my walking with my mother in those last years, because I needed help. And so I would call on them and it was like, okay, we got this now. I had a dream where it's like, okay, now you have to move really slow because there's so many presences around you now. So we make room to be guided and to be led and to hold us so that when we can't do it anymore, we can say help and trust that we will be helped. And that's the gift of suffering. of getting so to that point where you have to, on bended knees, ask for help. And then you discover that help is always there.
Mhm.
Grace is always there.
Oh, Nancy, you've shared such beautiful wisdom. If there was a microphone and you could send a message to every soul on the planet around this wisdom, what do you wish that they would recognize or have a better understanding of or have a knowing of?
To lean into death, not away from it, that trusting, going into whatever feeling that's are coming up, whether it's grief or pain or devastation, feeling it all, allowing us to feel it, allowing a little crack in our body to just allow it to be. Then we move through it and something else comes and then something else. And a surprise that often comes from going so deeply into something as hard as death and dying and grief is that there's a still point somewhere in there where a surprise happens, and that can be joy. And that's the paradox that we live in, that grief and joy, death and life, one big circle.
One big circle. And we're all one. And if we just realize that everyone is going through it, we're all going through all these experiences together. We're not separate.
That's right.
Yeah. Uh, Nancy, how do people find you and how do people find your book?
Well, I have a website, nancymacmillan.com. You can contact me through there. I also have a Substack where I keep the writings going that they got started with my book and then they haven't really stopped as new experiences keep bringing new thoughts and reflections. So I have a regular Substack newsletter that is free of charge. It's nancymacmillan.substack.com.
Oh, Nancy, I'm so glad you are still writing because your words, I just connect with everything you've written, and what a gift to share your words. For my fun curiosity, I just wanted to talk about the Celtic heritage. So,
Oh.
my ancestors are MacAlpins, and it's been this journey figuring out how the McAlpins came over to the States. And I think we ended up in Kentucky. And the red hair everyone always thinks is Irish, but it's actually probably Scottish more than it's Irish. And I have a past life remembrance of being in the forest and even being a tree, which I never quite understood until I started exploring the Celtic reverence for trees. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. Can you share a little bit about your knowledge or learning more about your Celtic ancestry?
Mhm.
Anything that comes to mind?
Well, that's how the title of the book came through, The Call to the Far Shore. Because as the image suggests, it's obviously the call to the far shore of what happens after death, but it's also me calling back to the roots of my ancestry, which would be on the Celtic shores. Through my life of trying to find meaning and place of belonging, and not really having a story to place me beyond my immediate family. Like many people, I was attracted to indigenous practices or Buddhism for a time, all these things to give me a way to go, not even knowing that I was missing something. It was uncomfortable to feel that I was always borrowing somebody else's because, first of all, Indigenous people don't necessarily want their traditions being usurped by people that are just needy and trying to find something. And a wise elder said to me, who are your people? Tell me about them. And when I couldn't really respond, he was pretty sad for me. And then I came across a book by Diana Beresford Kruger, To Speak for the Trees. And she talked about the Celtic triad of body, soul, and mind. And all of a sudden I realized that I do have a teaching. And everything that I had been leaning towards and trying to wrap my head around, there was a tradition deep, far back And I just needed to follow the breadcrumbs back and remember and know that it's operating in me, even though I didn't know it. But knowing it and having a name for it, even though I'm on this side of the ocean, I feel less of an orphan, as Stephen Jenkinson might say, the author of Die Wise, that I feel less of an orphan. I feel a sense of belonging now. And that's so rich to feel a braided thread back in time. I belong to a people and a place on earth.
Well, again, Nancy, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom on harmonic alignment. What a treat. I look forward to continuing our friendship and just continuing the conversation, because I think what you're bringing to the world around death and our acceptance of the next steps as being a beautiful journey that's always unfolding is so important. It's so
Mm,
important. So,
mm. A rich conversation. Thank you so much, Priscilla.
oh, thank you. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Harmonic Alignment. If something resonated with you, we would love to hear about it. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review and subscribing so you don't miss an upcoming episode. Thank you.